Welcome to Breast Implant Illness Hope for Healing. This is Cecily Henderson, your host. Thank you for joining us today. I have a very special guest I would like to introduce you to. She is a remarkable woman spreading hope, faith, and a strong message of self love. She's also a very accomplished author, movie producer, Harvard graduate, motivational speaker, and humanitarian. Her story is one of perseverance and how she overcame several severe medical complications, aggressive breast cancer, and breast implant illness. As a former Victoria's Secret model, she recently appeared during Miami Swim Week as a fierce and confident flat model. Ladies, she is a genuine inspiration helping women realize that their beauty does come from within. Welcome, Christine. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It is such a joy to have you on the podcast. As I was reading your biography and your book, just getting to know you a little bit better, I felt your compassion and the light that just surrounded you. And I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. I need to have you share your story with others because I want them to have hope. So I would love for you to introduce yourself and just share a little bit about your journey.
Well, my journey is long and arduous. I started modeling when I was a very young child, and for now 40 some odd years I'm still in the industry, but I had a couple decades of pause because I had first a colon resection, then a very terrible situation with my arm, then breast cancer, and then ultimately breast implant illness. So you add those up, and it's many, many, many years of my life in constant pain and physical agony and a lot of emotional duress. But what I've done since then is I wrote a book about my journey. I've become a public speaker about it. I've I still model. It's probably my main job. I'm also a social media influencer in a positive way. I'm on the board of 3 nonprofits, and every day I wake up, I get to serve and I get to give people hope. And it's so important in every capacity that I do to do that, because I remember when I was diagnosed and I felt very little hope, and that was a very difficult moment for me. So that's a very short version of what I've gone through in the last 50 some odd years.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I didn't realize. I knew who you were. I knew that you had gone through breast cancer, but you went through so much more.
Well, going back to my earlier years of modeling, I was very fixated on the external facade, which so many of us do, right? We're taught in society that, well, we should, when one, we should trust society, right? They're the ones that dictate what we should look like, what fashion is at that season of our life, and what is popular. So I tried to fit in with society for most of my life until I couldn't, because when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I realized that all that time spent trying to fit into a box that I never should have been in, it meant nothing, because all the bags that I was carrying, all the materialism that I coveted, and all the external beauty was about to be washed away. And the only tenet that I really could stand on was something that was eternal, and that was hope. And I quickly realized, because everything I coveted was being taken away, that there had to be something that I was missing, something that I was not coveting that was really the answer, and that was faith. And I wasn't coveting that, and I wasn't spending time doing that or participating as much as I should have. And ultimately, that was all I had. So I went back to really being a firm believer in faith and hope, and that's why I'm still here.
I love that. That is so important because I think sometimes we miss that aspect and we focus on that physical part, but we don't focus on that emotional and spiritual aspect as well. So, I
Well, and I think for me, because I started modeling at such a young age, I miss those years of learning self care and self love. I miss those nurturing years that so often happens between, being a teenager and young adulthood. It's just kind of a natural process. But again, I was so fixated in the industry that I was working in, and not to blame the industry. It was my decision to be in the industry. It was my decision to be successful in that industry and focus on that. And whatever we focus on, we become. So if I was focusing on being 120 pounds and blonde hair and certainly, a certain figure and, all the other things that come with it, then my focus is going to be on external. If my focus was on spirituality, I would have had a different life. And so what we focus on, we become. And I attribute that to a lot of my survival now because I'm focused on the right things. I'm focused on serving people without any sort of transaction. I think so often our world teaches us that if we do something for somebody, they should do something for us. I don't prescribe to that anymore. I did prescribe that for a long time because that was taught to me in the modeling space. A photographer would say to me, if you do this job for me, I'll get you in with this other client. And I thought, well, this is how the world works. I can do that. And then again, when you're diagnosed with an illness or breast implant illness or breast cancer or both or other illnesses, you realize that the transaction is not important. It's who shows up for you and how you show up for other people, but it's not transactional.
Thank you, Christine. I love hearing that because, there's so much in the breast implant illness community right now. And, these women, they just need that focus and to know that they're loved. That they just need that connection. And I'm having a really hard time trying to figure out how to unify. And I love hearing that you are doing that. You're trying to unify us as women and thinking about us loving ourselves and having that self-esteem and then giving to others, right? That is so important. It's such a wonderful aspect to focus on. And I know that you'd gone through a lot of pain, during cancer and having, other people having to take care of you. What was your lowest moment during that time?
Well, one thing I will say about unifying is we unify by storytelling. That is the whole purpose of what I'm doing. That is the whole purpose of this podcast. That is the whole purpose of being a social media influencer. That is the whole purpose of writing my book. That is the whole purpose of the movie. Because if we can share in a very vulnerable way our deepest and darkest moments, which I'll share in a moment what mine was, then we are offering to the world unity so that they don't feel so alone in their journey. But I would say my darkest moment was my cancer diagnosis. I had just spent a year in and out of the doctor's office dealing with an arm situation that ultimately led to the fusion of my right arm, which was in 2011. It's now 2024, and I'm still in chronic pain from that. I was in the
I'm so
oh,
sorry.
it's a tragic story.
I'm so very sorry.
And I was in a hotel in New York City, and for the whole year prior to my cancer diagnosis, I was using liquid soap and pouring it over my shoulder because I had a cast on from my fingertips to my shoulder. And so it was almost impossible to take a bath bar and wash my body to get it clean. And so I would just use liquid soap. Well, I was in this hotel in New York and there was no liquid soap. So I fumbled with this bar of soap and I tried to wash my breasts and I found a lump in the shower in New York City when I was up in New York City for my 6-week post arm fusion appointment. And I thought, well, this is some kind of hell. I'm 41 years old. I have 2 young kids and I got to figure out
Oh
how
my
to
gosh.
go the rest of my life. I didn't even know I was going to be in chronic pain at that point, but the rest of my life with a fused right arm, I have no idea how I'm going to lift my kids, bags anymore of their sporting events. How am I going to do yoga? How am I going to, cook and how am I going to drive? I had no idea. And then 5 days later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And at that point, I also didn't trust the medical community because this doctor had really, really, disappointing is not the right word, had really let me down. He was a bully. He had this God complex, this ego. And I was taught as a young girl, as a young woman, to trust the medical world. I mean, my grandfather was a doctor. He started a children's hospital. We had a lot of doctors in our family, and they were revered. That's what society tells us, right? We put them on a pedestal.
Right.
Well, these are people.
Exactly.
They make human error just like all of us. And so I had just gone off with that year with this really difficult human being in the medical world. And I just didn't trust doctors at that point. So here I was being diagnosed with breast cancer, and I had to get an oncologist, and I had to get a plastic surgeon, and I had to get a gynecological oncologist. And I had nurses and on and on and on. And I was like, I don't really want to talk to any of you. I don't really like you right now. I don't like myself. I don't like anybody in the world because you let me down. You taught me to covet things that didn't matter. And now I'm really confused. And I felt very little hope. I felt this emotional paralysis. And when you're in emotional paralysis, you can't move forward. There's no way out. And so I just smothered myself in this self pity and this victim mode, right? That's emotional paralysis. You're a victim. I was like, how is this happening to me? Why did this happen to me? Why did I let this doctor bully me? Why did I da da da? And it's also self blame. I wasn't to blame for what the doctor did to me. That wasn't my fault.
Mm.
And so I was in this paralysis, emotional paralysis. I was in this victim mode. And the only thing that dug me out were my friends. They would come to me and say, we will never forsake you. God will never forsake you. And I thought to myself, why? Why will they never forsake me? This is the third season they had to carry me so far. This isn't until the breast implant illness was later. I was like, why would they give up their resources and their time and their family to take care of mine? I can't even do anything for them. And I suddenly realized that all this transaction was just in my head. It didn't have to be that way. These women wanted nothing from me other than to love me. They were the hands and the feet of the Lord. And so I started to get out of this paralysis, this emotional paralysis, because they showed up in my life. They were like this crusade of women who were shoring me forward until I could shore for myself. I couldn't care for myself right then, especially emotionally. And they were my guides to get me out of this. And then once I was out of it, they said, you have a responsibility now. Now it's your job to do what we did. And I have taken that very seriously. I have spent the last 12 years of my life serving every single woman I possibly could because I remember the depth of my pain. And man, I wanted to quit. I wanted my life to be over. I was like, I have had it with life. We are not friends anymore. We don't get along anymore. I am so confused. And once I get out of that, instead of digging a hole, I dug myself out of it. I realized that I could be a vine. And when you become a vine, your life changes because serving is joy. I had great happiness in my life prior to all of my illness, but joy comes from serving. And when you have the ability to serve other people by using your story or using your terrible circumstances to make sure that other people don't feel alone, that's serving. And that's pure joy.
Thank you. I needed to hear that today. Thank you. Cuz, the service that I try to do in my life, it always uplifts me, and just manifesting that and hearing that from you just brings me joy.
Yeah.
So, thank you. I appreciate that. I needed
Well,
that.
it's a privilege. I mean,
Yeah.
I know people
Yes.
who will say to me, "Do you have any survivor's guilt?" Absolutely not. And I'm not dismissing how they feel. Everybody feels how they feel, and that's inside of them. I don't feel guilty for being on this earth. I feel God has a purpose for me, and until my purpose is done, I am here to do a job. There's no guilt in that. The worst emotions that we don't, and the ones we don't need, are shame and despair. We don't need them.
Absolutely.
So we got to get rid of them. If they come into their life, remember those are not from God. They are not meant to be here. We have to get rid of those. Replace those. Instead of despair, find hope. Instead of shame, be a vine, serve the world. There's nothing shameful
That's
about
right.
being you.
I love that. And it's so true. And I think we miss that, right? We don't think about that. We think about all the other things. We don't think about serving, and it brings so much joy. Thank you.
Well, there's a difference between serving and self-serving, right? I mean, for years,
Right.
but I know the difference because I did it. I self-served for a long time, but that was when I felt that was when I had a very low self-esteem. When I had a very low self-esteem when, as a young woman, and probably in the biggest modeling jobs I ever had, I had the worst self-esteem. And that was when I was going through a very self-serving stage of my life. Like, okay, I want to covet this. I want to buy this. I want to consume this, right? Because I felt bad about myself. I was trying to fill myself up with things. But there's no U-Haul behind the hearse. We can't take them. So instead of filling myself up with material things, I started filling myself up with people and relationships and giving back. It's different.
I love that. That's so inspiring. And I know I just so if you don't mind, I'd love to talk a little bit about your book.
Yes.
I when I so I purchased it and I thought, okay, this is like a 318 page book. And I'm like, okay, can I get through this? And my husband, I was reading it. It took me one day. I didn't put it down. I could not stop reading it. I the main character Willow, I connected with her and all of
Mhm.
the things that she was going through, her darkest thoughts. Because when I had cancer and
Mhm.
I had breast implant illness and I was paralyzed, I just remember thinking these very deep, dark, hopeless thoughts. And
Yeah.
am I going to live? Am I going to continue to be here? And then am I going to be able to take care of my family? And all of those emotions were going on as I was reading your book. And I was going along with the story. I'm like, oh my gosh, this relates to me. This is what something I went through. And it was so healing. By the time I got to the end of the book, I had so much gratitude
Mm.
in my heart for the people that had helped me, and then of course for God
Mm.
getting me through what I went through, because it was, and what the character and what you went through, and he gets you through it. And it was a very healing experience. So please, I want you to tell us a little bit about your book and share, why you decided, what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, well, I wrote it because when I was going through breast cancer, I sought out, this will come up with the movie too, sought out media, sought out books about what I was about to embark on. I was so fearful. But if I could read about it and I could read a story that somebody lived, I could read or watch a movie about a breast cancer patient that walked off the set and they were alive and they were happy. Those are the things that I wanted to watch because I was young. I didn't have any contemporaries that had breast cancer. The only person I knew that had breast cancer was my mother's best friend, and she died. And so I was seeking out stories of hope, right? That's unifying. That's like making us feel less alone. And so people gifted me beautiful books, faith-based books, self-esteem books, self-help books, beautiful books. But none of them were a fictional depiction of a story that I was about to go through. So I watched my friends show up month after month. I went through 15 months of chemotherapy and I was like watching at the same time. That was probably the height of the housewives of every city now. And I was thinking to myself, why is everywhere I'm looking in society tearing women down? And why is the community around me shoring me forward? What's the difference? Well, the world isn't showing that, right? That's not what we're showing to the world. So what if
Right.
I wrote a book about that? What if I showed women championing for each other and saving a life? Would that matter? And would that allow somebody who's come after me to have a guide of a story of hope and survival? And so I started to take meticulous notes during my journey and really my goal was to write a book about a hopeful story. And so then after it was published, people were saying the same thing. They read it in a day and they were very touched by it because they had similar experiences, which propelled me to do more. Then I became a public speaker. Then I went on social media to be part of the social media club that's actually bears witness to hope and bears witness to promoting a positive message. And then ultimately, I my book was bought to become a film, and that has taken over the last 6.5, more maybe more now, years of my life, because I thought,
Wow.
wow, okay, if I can share this message in a book, and I can share this message on a stage, and I can share this message in social media and on podcasts and on interviews, what kind of what kind of storytelling, what kind of uniting can happen if it's in a film? And so that's ultimately the greatest goal that I've had, and it's coming to fruition. Just need a little bit of help right now with God to get it out there, and off we go.
Well, I believe in what you're doing. This that we need this. and I really think that God's going to make this work because this is exactly what we need,
Yeah.
especially as women. In the breast cancer and breast implant illness and these difficult illnesses that women go through, we need to unite. And
Yeah.
so thank you for doing this. I mean, oh my goodness, all this work. Reading everything that you've accomplished, I'm like, oh my goodness, this woman went back to Harvard. She's a movie producer. She's, a philanthropist. She's got like two or three different, nonprofit organizations. I'm like, wow, you are doing so much. Plus, with the modeling and, having your arm hurt all the time, and you're still
Yeah.
there helping others. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Encouragement really helps.